behind. When all the world seems in tune, and love goes on softly on. So don't be sighing or crying, dear, if winter
Hi, welcome to another Lawyers, Guns, and Money podcast with Scott Eric Kaufman, and
Steve Atwell. Hi.
We are going to be talking about Game of Thrones, an episode that I will undoubtedly refer to as Oath Breakers throughout it, because in my head, that's what the episode is called. I don't care how wrong it is. But we should obviously start with the beginning. Do you want to kick us off, or?
Yeah. Slowly learning how to speak Westerosi from Missandei, and I really like this scene. It was like a nice little encapsulation of like, what is slavery about? What are people who actually were slaves thinking about what they're doing?
And it's a classic scene from American slave narratives. I mean, you go to Frederick Douglass or any other of your slave narratives. And I go to Douglass because the scene of him entering the library in Maryland when he's still a slave and looking at all the books and then realizing that they all contain knowledge and that knowledge is exactly what's going to get him to. Yeah. So it's both a scene of reading and a scene of cultural assimilation and possible subterfuge, but it's a really powerful scene and also echoes what we've been getting with Davos.
Right. David, the historian David Blight, and by the way, if anyone hasn't actually listened to his lecture series on the Civil War and Reconstruction, they really should, talks about the sort of this enormous place that literacy had within the world of abolitionism, that
absolutely
being able to read and write was as much a sort of a defiance expression of your personhood as anything else. That, by writing and reading, you were sort of declaring your personhood to the world.
And it's also because of the danger that goes with knowledge. I mean, when I was, I don't know, maybe in 10th grade, we took a field trip to a plantation home in Louisiana, and one of the things they showed us there was what was called a slave Bible. And it was mostly New Testament. They had the Old Testament, but there was a book missing from the slave Bible. You know what it is?
I'm going to guess Exodus.
Yes, it was. Exodus was missing. And there was this whole subculture of sort of what we would call, later on, Samizdat, Exodus.
So the Ten Commandments weren't in the slave Bible.
No, they were not.
That's astonishing.
But all of the kosher laws, Deuteronomy, totally there. But no, and also, of course, the laws on how long you keep a slave. It's not a jubilee yet.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, what was really interesting is that a lot of the spirituals ended up being a way to reintroduce Exodus to the rest of the Bible. So if you listen to a lot of the lyrics of the spirituals, that's what they are.
Come down, Moses, etc.
Yeah. Moses, who's Moses? We don't. Oh, he just sort of appears without Exodus. But it's I think a really important thing to think about when you're kind of considering what's going on in this opening scene. The world or the mind expanding of the slave.
And you can see he's learning to read, but at the same time he has his own definition of what freedom is going to mean. That Missandei is working within this kind of like, well, what about going home? What about moving on and closure and becoming something else? And he's like, no. What freedom means to me is kill the masters.
Yeah, they're not really subtle with that in this episode, are they?
No, and that's what sets up this next scene where we get this huge shot of Marine. I really think they're doing a much better job with scale this season than they have been in previous seasons. We see this.
It was a little empty with just Dany there, but when they're actually breaking into the sewers, I thought it was.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Where it's sort of you get this overhead shot of the city and then going in through the sewers,
absolutely.
Which kind of given the way in which they've been sort of mixing and matching between the book and the show in terms of the taking of the cities, I kind of like that nod to the original. And then we get this really good scene in which the slaves are debating revolution. And, you can imagine, this is what a slave barracks on the eve of a slave revolution looks and sounds like. And then, having this kind of subversion of it's not going to be this enormous siege in the way that it was in the books. It's going to be a revolution from within. That the slaves make a choice once they have weapons. Sorry, you were saying.
Oh, no. The no one can give you your freedom, you must take it. I mean, that's also a sort of great answer to the sort of white savior complex we begin with Danny, right? They in the end, they do still do the white savior thing, but,
but it's complicated more, and there's an edge to it. Especially, once the slave master sees the writing on the walls, and literally, although, surprise, surprise, Valyrian seems to be same thing as English.
No. The audience is in a TARDIS, therefore we can just... Yeah.
Okay. I like that. But, while we do get the cheering crowds, we also get this moment where Dany is clearly rejecting advice to be a good guy.
Yeah.
And, as a result, Dany is smiling while watching 163 people being crucified, and, you pan up the pyramid, and there's, her banner draped across the Harpy of Meereen, and it's got a slight kind of Triumph of the Will vibe going on. Like, this is very much will to power in action, and, that should raise questions about, is Dany on the right path here, because she's rejecting sage advice, she's going, she's killing people en masse, and what is this new regime going to look like?
And in terms of the parallel that we've talked about before between her and Jon Snow as sort of the people who might win this whole war thing, the fact that she's rejecting the advice of a Mormont, and later in the episode, Jon will call...
No, she's rejecting Sir Barristan's advice.
Oh, is that Barristan? Okay, never mind then. I take that back. I was wrong.
There's a lot of bearded white dudes in this show.
The white guys with beards. What's wrong with that? We need to diversify. But yeah, it's a good scene. The 163 people. I like the way that she asks it, as if she didn't remember. How many miles were there? When it was specifically pointed out to her, because that's not for. Yeah. I think it's more rhetorical. For everyone to hear, right? So
and it almost works like a signal, because you see the Unsullied start to round people up the moment she says that.
Yep.
So we go from there to Jaime. Sorry, go ahead.
But she's not the direct instigator. I think that's important because we have been critical of the show for the white savior complex, the crowd surfing, Dany, victorious. Yeah. So this was much better, much more complex than we've seen previously in terms of her ability to take cities. But moving on to Jaime and Bronn, right? So
you wrote about this in your recap, what with the eye lasers and all that. And I kind of like it sets up a number of running questions. The first of which is, did Tyrion do it? Right? And we see this throughout, a half dozen scenes.
Yeah.
Where people are asking, did Tyrion do it? But it also sets up the question, which side is Jaime going to be on? And,
especially in light of last episode, that's a serious question.
Yeah. And we did get to see Jaime get hit in the face with his own hands. In the case of literally, stop hitting yourself. And then we finally get to see the Kingslayer brothers reunited, which, by the way, sounds like a great country band.
That would be Kinslayers, not Kingslayers, I think.
Yeah. And I really like this scene because it's all about everyone's asking questions that they're not willing to answer.
Or that they fear they already know the answer to, And they
yeah, well, I mean, in most cases, they know the answers, except for the big question about, are you going to help me or not? But, they're talking around uncomfortable truth. And as long as they don't answer the question, they don't have to, like, Jaime doesn't confront the question of, is he Joffrey's father?
Well, I mean, Tyrion puts it pretty straightforwardly,
Yeah.
And then Jaime deflects. But that's all Jaime can do. I mean, it's odd that his conversation is very much like his fight with Bronn.
Right, deflection.
Deflect. But he can't actually...
hit in the face, yeah.
And I actually thought about that parallel. But it's a beautiful shot scene. Again, we're seeing sort of the strength of the directors in these scenes where literally it's two people sitting in a dungeon. How can we make this interesting? And Michelle MacLaren, who was one of the producers of Breaking Bad, directed many of the best episodes of Breaking Bad and also some of the best episodes of Game of Thrones, does a phenomenal job of making Jaime and Tyrion sitting in a dungeon look interesting by putting them 18 feet apart, is what I learned on Twitter from one of the...
Wow, that's a big room.
Directors. Yeah. It's the only way they could shoot it so that that they could make direct eye contact. After I posted my recap from Raw Story, one of the ADs sent me a thing. He's like, yeah, they were at least 18 feet apart. They were on the other side of the room in order to make that angle work. So they really wanted to kind of emphasize what we discussed in a previous podcast about how
it's always good to get the word from the horse's mouth that you're absolutely right.
Well, yeah, and of course I wouldn't say anything if they told me I was wrong. No, I would of course say that because that's actually funnier and better copy. But no, it does indicate that what we discussed in the previous podcast about them trying to create an impression of equality between Jaime and Tyrion,
right?
Something that they're deliberately doing.
Yeah, and then we get this interesting scene with Sansa. Yeah, and I like how they're linking the scenes by having somebody mention someone. And then we cut to that someone.
I really thought they were going to Arya here. I really did. I thought when they said because I think the last thing he says is Sansa's not a killer, or at least not anyway. I thought that was like, oh yeah, cut to the Stark sister, who is a killer.
Nah.
It's direct.
Yeah, misdirect. And I thought this scene was interesting because there's a little bit of exposition, just literally stating like where is Sansa going, what is going on. But then it gets into more of these really interesting questions. Why did you do this? Did you do this? Who was involved? And what's interesting is, people have complained a lot about, or I should say, people online who are big fans of Sansa's storyline in the books have complained a lot about her characterization. Not so much her acting, the acting, but the dialogue and especially the story edits that have been done on Sansa's storyline in the previous couple seasons. But here I thought we got much more of who Sansa becomes in the books. That she's thinking through all of this. And you can see, Littlefinger very much engaged in a project of grooming here. This kind of nodding approvingly at, seeing her follow the steps of logic. That, she knows that Dantos wasn't the one who put in the poison because he's not reliable enough. It's not Tyrion.
And yeah, I think I mentioned that it's in part because I think she's been around her husband a lot. She's learning. Because those early conversations with her and Marjorie were she was just naive. She had no idea that anything was going on. Oh, you want to be my sister? Okay, I'll be your sister. That sounds great. You have no ulterior motives. And to go from those conversations last season to this conversation, where she's, working through it step by step.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look back, you can sort of see the gradual evolution towards this. That the Sansa who survived season 2 by being very self-controlled and knowing when to keep her mouth shut. The Sansa who, by this point, has observed so much scheming going on around her, is starting to be able to do this herself.
I think what the big difference, and I know this is going to sound very obvious because I'm just going to say the Red Wedding, but I think the effect that the Red Wedding had on her was to make her realize that she'd always sort of relied on her status, that she would be protected and she would be able to advance because of who she was, betrothed to, who she could marry, and the Red Wedding threw that all out, and that's the moment where I sort of see her suddenly, to my mind at least, deciding I should pay attention to all this shit that everyone around me is saying, because I can't rely on these sort of old forms of relationships. I'm going to need to be more like the people I'm around in order not just to thrive, but to simply survive.
Right. Yeah, I mean, certainly after her marriage to Tyrion, a lot of her kind of, even her plan B, so to speak, of escaping to Highgarden and what that would have meant in terms of somewhat of a reversion to type, in terms of, being safe and actually living the life of a noble wife. I didn't mean to rhyme there. Here she's in a very different place. The other thing I like in this scene is that we really start to dig into Littlefinger. And, he's very much like, he's the man with no motive. Keep your foes confused. She's kind of calling him on his bullshit a little bit. And sort of saying, this is a huge risk. Why did you do this? And, what do you want?
I was reading, not that I do it normally, but I looked at Entertainment Weekly, and they asked the man who plays Littlefinger, whose name is escaping me at the moment because I didn't write down my notes, Aidan. They asked him what his inspiration for this scene was, and he very coyly said, "Well, I was in The Dark Knight Rises," and this is a moment where he really is going for the Joker, right? I mean, he's
kind of.
keep your foes confused. That way, they never. It's this is the logic of the Dark Knight fell apart in the middle. No one noticed because everyone was too riveted by Heath Ledger's performance. But the plan makes no sense. I'm going to attack a truck with a machine gun and then get put in jail where I'll have a lackey blow a bomb up inside himself from a cell phone. I don't have yet. It makes no sense. And
it was very much rule of cool.
Yeah, and Littlefinger sort of saying the same thing here, like, oh yeah, I'm just shaking things up. Stability. Who needs stability? Right? I just want to watch the world burn.
Right. Except that, and this is the interesting thing, is that when she asks him what he wants, even though he tosses off this line that he wants everything, right? Just by looking at the way that he's touching Sansa here.
Oh yeah, we know what everything means.
Yeah, it is very clear that he has more explicable motives than he's willing to admit.
Yeah, that little touch on the arm and that wistful look that he gets in his eye when he sees Catelyn in Sansa.
Yeah.
Creepy.
Yeah. So, speaking of sort of interesting approaches to sexuality, we get Marjorie and Olenna sort of setting out how exactly to sort of sink your hooks into a husband.
Yeah, it's I mean, again, as we said in the last podcast, this is and this week on Downton Abbey. I mean, all of a sudden it's just people talking again about.
Well, I mean, about killing people and about
sort of, but it's
potentially seducing a preteen boy.
It's a quaint scene in a garden. I mean, it's.
I did like that they sort of did a fourth wall nod, like, if I have to walk around this fucking garden one more time, I'm gonna burn it down.
Remind me of the South Park parody of Game of Thrones, where Cartman continually took people around the garden dressed in.
Yeah.
But
I do hope that we're not losing Lady Olenna for good.
I have no idea. I agree with you. I hope we're not, but I mean, given the books, things are going to be shifting away from her necessarily.
Yeah, so, we'll just have to see how we go with that. But let me see, where do we go from there?
We go to Castle Black, and it's the first day of school again. We're back in season 1, except John's the teacher, not the pupil.
And notably, the little orphan boy turns out to be the best archer in his village. Hint, 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 hint.
Yeah, it's wonderfully done, and
it's good to see Jon Snow building a relationship with the people around him.
Maybe not necessarily with Ciri's invented Locke, but
well, the problem there is that he's building a relationship where he shouldn't.
Yeah, but I mean, one thing I really do like about this scene is by bringing both Locke and Alistair in there, that we're seeing in what in the books ends up being a bit of a stagnant period for Jon's narrative. Like, we're getting some hints as to where conflict might arise. I mean, Slint's still there, so we have a Lannister mole. Obviously, Locke is although who the fuck knows? Maybe he's a blank slate. Maybe we don't know what he. I mean, sorry.
No, he's clearly a Bolton mole.
Yeah, he's a Bolton.
But what I did like was that the way that they set up Janos Slint. Hello?
I'm here.
Hello? Okay. The way that they set up Janos Slint to sort of suggest to Alistair Thorne that Jon Snow be Uriah'd, I thought was a good way of, like, how do you get Alistair Thorne, like, being an obstructive asshole, but still have Jon Snow go out and do this?
Yeah, and I mean, we're setting up a lot with sending Jon out there, right? I mean, we're way outside of the books and way outside of canon with Jon, and we'll get to it later with Jon and Sam's conversation. But yeah, making Jon into a leader a little bit prematurely.
No, not really.
You don't think it?
He is a leader within his age cohort, which is where he is supposed to be at this point in the series.
Okay, that makes sense.
You have to. There needs to be some interstitial stage between, like, raw recruit and.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on to Cersei getting smashed.
Now, one thing I loved about this, just to talk about the visuals before we actually get to the content, is watching this on the TV, the shot of Cersei was so shallow that I could not even tell who she was talking to for about the first 15 or 20 seconds. I picked it up contextually. It had to be, but I think it's really significant that McLaren shot it in a way that it almost looked like Cersei was talking to herself in an extreme shallow focus, and then all of a sudden, we'll rack a bit, and look, it's your brother.
Yeah. Except that, and this is my major critique, and this is what I wrote about in my Esquire piece, they are not interacting like rapey here. Like, Cersei's anger is very specifically focused on, one, Tommen's protection.
Which he's doing a job of at the moment.
Yeah. Two, this whole question about where Jaime's loyalties lie because of his absence and, like, this time that he spent around other women.
And imprisoned, but yes.
And three, like, this question of his loyalty vis-a-vis Tyrion. These are not the these are not the reactions of Cersei to someone who raped her. The way that Cersei reacts to people who rape her is she murders them. She does it very thoroughly.
Here's, if I were going to just throw out a sort of refutation of that, what I would say is that what it suggests is that this is not the first time Jaime's gone away, come back, and been too forceful. That this is part of a pattern, obviously of actual rape, and I'm not trying to diminish what he did, but that in terms of how the relationships work, or the relationship works, they're they're sort of accustomed to the having occasional absences, developing relations with other people in the meantime, and then when they reunite, Jamie's a little aggressive. And again, I'm not trying to mitigate what happened in any way, shape, or form, but her reaction does seem to indicate that maybe this is something that's happened before. Obviously not their son dying and stuff, but this is part of a larger structure, and she's able to slot herself back into a role that she's had to take up before.
See, I don't buy that because, one, that really doesn't fit with their relationship in the books. Like, in the books, Cersei is very much the driving force in this relationship. She's the one who initiated it. She's the one who made sure that it kept going by convincing Jaime to join the Kingsguard and not get married to Lysa Tully.
She could keep screaming.
So it's just, and it's the one relationship in her life where she is more in charge, and it's part of why it's so important to her. So if that's what they're going with, I still think that's problematic.
I agree with you. The other reason I brought up structure is because of, and I talked about this a little in my recap, but just how formal this scene was shot.
Sure, I still think this is a relationship. Sorry, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, these are two people who are not behaving so much as playing their assigned roles, and they're more characters in a play that they already know the lines to than they are human beings interacting with each other. And I think McLaren sort of almost foregrounds that by having this like long shot where the curtains are literally draped on the side, like masterpiece fucking theater from the 1970s. Right, where you have Hamlet going on stage, and you can still see the curtains. And the structure, the composition of the shot is so formal. With each of them, there's the fire in the middle, and then they're each 2.5 feet away from the fire, and then 3.5 feet away from the curtains. It makes it seem like it's something that's been routinized. It's formal. It's not actual humans interacting with each other. It's staged, essentially, and they both know that they're players.
That's fair enough. It's just, I think it's problematic in the sense that Cersei is reaching out to Jaime here. She's asking him for something, right? Get Sansa for me. And, again, it's another moment in this episode where Jaime is being asked to choose his loyalties.
But he doesn't, and that's...
Well, hold on, let me finish. And it's not the last time that she's going to reach out to him. I don't want to spoil anything, but there will be future occasions in which she is going to, reach out to Jaime, try to rely on Jaime, and that's not how she would react to someone who would violate her in this way.
Well,
so I think this was, like, honestly, last episode, that scene, I think they botched it, and I think it's creating this weird disjuncture.
I'm gonna hold off saying whether or not they botched it until we see a couple more episodes, because they may end up doing something. I'm not saying I condone it in any way. I'm just saying that they might end up doing something interesting with it. But one thing I will notice that her jealousy, talking about that great cow instead of saying Brienne's name, because what Jaime's going to do is he's not going to actually. I mean, yes, she's helping Cersei by finding Sansa, but you really get the feeling that when he's talking to Brienne, that's where his real loyalty lies. That it lies with Brienne and Tyrion, who he's going to do the same favors he was being asked to do otherwise.
Right.
Sansa, protect Pod, but he's doing so willingly because of these people he considers friends and equals, as opposed to being coerced by his sister.
Right. So speaking of interesting interactions, let's talk about Tommen and Marjorie, and the introduction of possibly the show's most important character, Sir Pounce.
Who just made an entrance in the room earlier. That's why I disappeared for a second.
Gotcha.
But it's a great scene. Sort of as I wrote, it's a scene in which Marjorie sneaks into his bedroom and convinces him that it's possible she might one day not just like him, but she'll like him. It's and this is weird because it should be totally fucking creepy, and yet
I thought they were going to go in a creepy direction. I was like, please do not have Marjorie actually seduce a preteen. That would just be too freaky. But instead,
it was so great. She was so great at being, I don't know, there's no non-creepy way to say it, so I'm not even going to try. But it at creating an alliance where that didn't seem sexual, even though the Freudian implications of her petting his cat.
Yeah, I mean,
when followed by Bran taking up Jaime's sword. I mean,
yeah, I mean, it was more about, I would say, kind of a pre-adolescence view of sort of the promise of sex down the road.
I didn't
that, like what.
The thing that popped in my head when I was watching it, and it's gonna sound really weird, but do you remember that old Macaulay Culkin? What's her name? Anna Klumsky. I think that's her last name. That film My Girl, which was about.
No, I don't.
And his slightly older female friend, and then there's an incident with bees, and he dies, or she dies, or no spoilers, but somebody dies.
I know there was bees.
Yeah, there were bees.
That's it.
But it's that sort of almost like she's inhabiting the role of someone much younger than her, not to seduce, but to friend. Okay, and there's again, even if I'm saying this, it sounds fucking creepy. But
yeah, well, there's a creepy element to it.
Yeah, it doesn't play creepy at all, and I think that's just a testament to
well, especially. Yeah. I think there's a moment where it's like teetering on the edge, like when she goes in for the kiss and moves from the lips to the forehead. That was an important sort of switch. They were like, "Are we going to go this way? No, we're not."
Yeah, and it sort of cemented the. And the other thing is, even with Marjorie, who knows she's being manipulated always to Tuesday by everyone in her entire life, you know, it almost seems like she doesn't want to be as boldly manipulative as people are with her. Like, she wants to let Tommen think that this is his choice, even if it isn't. And again, like I said, it still sounds creepy, but it really struck me as a very sweet moment.
Well, it's her understanding of the importance of a light hand, of a light touch. That, you know, part of the way that she's going to win against Cersei is that Cersei is this overbearing maternal figure, and she's going to be the kind of the fun one to hang out with.
Well, she tried that with Joffrey. It didn't really work. But
yeah,
very different boy. And then we cut from that to Bran and Jaime and do you want to touch my sword? Well, yes, I'll touch your sword. I mean, that was a Freudian moment par excellence. Bran has wanted to touch Jaime's sword for a long time, and this gave her. And then she, of course, names his sword Oathkeeper. So the king's sword is named Oathkeeper.
Yeah.
Whose oath? Who are you giving that? I mean, it's another really great tender scene. It's a lovely moment between these two.
Right, and it's a moment that wouldn't be plausible coming from, like, a rapist.
Yeah. And here we get into the dynamics that you're talking about. If we hold it against Jaime, this is a weird scene. If we think,
I mean,
yeah.
Like, specifically, when they talk about, he's got so much blank space on his page in the book, and he says, there's still room left on mine to write my future, to decide what kind of person I'm going to be.
Oh, and he's asking for help with that, and that's a key thing.
Yes. Yeah, that's the whole thing, is that, his whole life, or at least since the moment that, he killed the king, he's thrown away ironically what he's always wanted. He's always wanted to be a knight, to inhabit that role. And now, because he's lost his hand and because of sort of the whims of fate, he can't do it himself. but he's still looking for some way to kind of get back to not so much goodness, but betterness.
Yeah,
and
I agree. By the
Brienne
way,
is going to be
I just heard an AK-47 fall in the hallway outside of me. It did not go off. Don't worry, I'm safe.
Okay.
I just heard a gun case fall over. But yeah, I think this should be a much bigger moment for Jaime than it is because it's been undercut by the controversy caused by last episode.
Right.
And okay, now I'm a little sad about that.
Yeah.
Damn it, you're convinced.
But if you need an uplifting moment, the scene where Brienne is introduced to Pod and Pod gets Tyrion's axe. I mean, that's just heartwarming.
It is. One thing I meant to go back and rewatch it, because someone mentioned this in the comments that did Pod actually help her onto the horse?
I'm not. They didn't show it. They showed him bending down to do it.
Yeah, and then he was bending down, and then she was on the horse. I just couldn't remember if they actually showed the. But even if they didn't, it's an odd moment because of these two characters are such proxies for Sansa, Jaime, Cersei, that them helping each other is a really. If he did do that, and again, I'm speculating because I don't remember, would be really interesting, especially given the next scene we cut to, which is Sam and Jon, right?
Right.
Where we have Pod and Brienne becoming fast friends, and then
literally Sancho Panza and Don Quixote.
Yeah, and then we cut to the exact same situation 3 years later, and we get a something that on the Westeros listserv that we're both on created quite a bit of controversy because it's not in the fucking books. It's not in the books.
Yeah. But more specifically, it changes. I mean, information changes how characters react to things.
I wouldn't refute that. But
Jon Snow doesn't need another reason. Like, they've already set up a reason for Jon Snow to need to go to Craster's Keep. He doesn't need another one.
He doesn't, but given that last season ended with that incredibly close call, right?
Right.
Jon and Bran. I mean, this might just be another tease that they almost were just reunited again. Because as we mentioned at the end of last season, these people have not seen each other since season 1. We think of them all as like a family because we see them, but we sort of forget that on the show they haven't seen each other in ages, and that's something I think is sometimes lost on viewers because of the illusion of temporal contiguity. We just assume that because they're pressed together in time in narrative, they're not that distant. They really are distant. And this might be a way of emphasizing that distance by having another near miss or setting another near miss up. So I did sort of like that.
And I will say, though, that, while they are being kind of quiet with one another in the archives, they're really not good about making sure they don't get overheard by the bad guy, because that was pretty obvious.
They're not very good at subterfuge, but then again, they didn't grow up at King's Landing. They need to take some lessons from Aemon, and maybe he's gotten good at lying, not subterfuge.
Right, but he's good at giving a speech. Here we get. Jon Snow gets Alisher Thorne to sanction the raid because Alisher Thorne would like Jon Snow to die so that he doesn't have to face him in the upcoming election. So Jon Snow has to give a speech, and I like the speech. It's a nice blend of like the practical reasons. We have to preserve, operational secrecy. Can't let the word get out there. And then the thing about Mormont.
The audience.
Mormont was our father.
Let's go for the other. We'll appeal to their heads. That doesn't work. We'll go for their hearts. And
Yeah.
And then we cut away from them, and we don't see what happens from that. Although we do end up.
No. We saw Bren stands up, then Ed stands up, and then Locke stands up.
Yeah, but we knew they were all. I mean, there's no real
Yeah.
they were gonna stand up. I'm saying we don't get to see the follow through yet.
No, instead we see Carl holding court in the world of abused women.
Yes, and everyone who was like, "This is a great episode. We're gonna have no sex position." Sorry.
I don't know if this counts as sex position as just like.
Well, it's a return. We mentioned last week that this sounds that there are parts of the show which went almost an entire season without saying a single curse word. That they're really embracing its inner Deadwood.
Yeah, especially they used cocksucker for the first time.
And fucking cunts. I was a fucking legend in Janali. I mean, Bern Gorman.
Well, the show has liked to use the C word. That's been sort of a Game of Thrones thing, but cocksucker has been a Deadwood word for years.
Yes, I'm beholden.
And this is the first time that.
Yeah, I mean
exactly.
But I would like to just throw in a little shout out. Bern Gorman, one of my favorite genre actors. He's great. Torchwood. He was in The Dark Knight Rises. He's been
Pacific Rim.
Yeah, he's in Pacific Rim. He's in the new AMC series Turn. He's so good at being so unlikable, and you just want someone to punch him in the face for fucking ever, like
especially when you learn that he's drinking out of Gior Mormont's skull.
A very Hamlet moment, right?
Yeah.
We open with the sort of classic Hamlet. Right, alas, poor Yorick, I knew him well, except it's, Jorah, I'm going to drink out of your fucking skull.
Yeah. He's ordering people to be raped to death. He's put Ghost in a cage. I thought that was kind of clumsy, but, I get what they're going with there. Because realistically, Ghost should have murdered about a dozen people en route to the cage. And then we get this kind of, the part that I liked was when they all start chanting, "A gift for the gods, a gift for the gods." That had a nice, Children of the Corn feel to it.
Well, and I think part of the reason they had to do that is because we just left the Night's Watch, or we just left the Wall, and so McLaren had to remind us that these guys are still like that. They have that mentality of follow the leader. They just have a different leader, and there's also the weird implication that whoever's in charge at Craster's Keep is going to be a fucker. Something about the place just ruins you.
Right. So we get the baby getting put out. We get Rast taunting Ghost, which is never a good idea.
No.
Although I have to say, I think using the water as opposed to the meat is kind of weird. Just I don't normally think of taunting a starving animal with water.
It's really cold. That's...
Yeah. Okay, but I thought they the rest of the cues there were good enough. Anyway, it suddenly gets cold and freaky, and then we cut to Bran and the crew getting captured, the wolf getting captured. This Jojen having a fit, and then revealing who these kids are. This felt like the more Scooby-Doo-ish part of the episode.
I don't know. Honestly, when we were watching it, I think one of the worst moments, and something that just really hit me hard, and I sort of made light of it in my recap, in part just because it hurt, was the torturing of Hodor. Just that.
Oh God, yeah.
That was so brutal. So I can't really say this struck me as cartoonish, because once they hit that note, I was just, they were asking him questions and beating him, and all he could say was, and what had been a running joke became this
sad thing.
Horrifying moment, and you just sort of wished at that point that
right.
You were watching an episode of The Incredible Hulk, and all of a sudden Hodor would turn into Lou Ferrigno, and just because it was one of those moments where you just it it grounded everything. Is I guess.
Right. And I'll just say for the just for the record, we have no idea where they're going with this. This is like we are at this point completely off the damn map.
Yeah. What's his name? Brian
Cogman.
Cogman. He he said that he had in an interview today. He said he had George R. R. Martin's blessing for the direction he's going in, but no, we're well outside the canon. And I'm okay with that because I've already read the books, and so I sort of don't mind having a little different story. But the weird juxtaposition of Hodor than the baby, the idea that Bran is now going to be held for ransom, although I don't really think Carl... And all this is happening, of course, when we already know, intellectually at least, Jon's coming.
Right. Jon's
already on his way. So, part of my reaction to this is, like, what the fuck is taking you so long? Just, get here already. And we don't even know if he will or won't. I mean, now we're in pure speculation. Normally we have the books to rely on. Now we're like, this is you're getting our true fandom here.
All right. So let's cut to the scene that everybody's talking about.
Circles at the end, right?
Yes.
I know. It's like everything.
Talk about going all the way off the beaten path, right? This is what blew the book readers' minds in this episode.
Before we start, we should note that at approximately 9:02 p.m. last night, Central Time, Scott, sent you, Stephen, an email saying, what the fuck was that? Because I have to write something about this, and I have no idea what just happened. So we're not speaking hypothetically about readers' minds being blown. I had no idea what to make of this. I thought Stephen, but I mean, I thought it was brilliantly shot. I mean, it's suddenly this epic scale again.
And especially the visuals of the Heart of Winter, that enormous ice castle thing. That was astonishing. I have to say, I didn't so much like the White Walker with the horns.
Okay.
I didn't quite like that look.
I mean, you sort of jumped ahead because we had this slow procession. We had to get there.
I know.
Circle. He had to see the baby, and then we're looking at the baby, and then we get that reverse shot, and all of a sudden we're like, "What the fuck is that?" Because we literally have the perspective of the baby when we see him, because we see the finger come down, and I don't know what the horns are about. Totally, Yeah,
I just think, for my 2 cents, I think this is a case of like, okay, this level of VFX this season need to revamp a little bit for next season. It just looked a little, I wasn't feeling it.
It felt a little like I was playing Skyrim. But another way to put that would be, in the first season, the first time we get a glimpse of in the prologue, and I think we talked about this in our first podcast, was he was there for a fifth of a second. So your mind registered that you saw a face, but you couldn't actually see horns on the head, and I think that would have been a lot creepier. So when we make the fan version of this episode, we will cut that, but I really did like the touch.
Yeah, the touch on the face, that was awesome. And just to get to the main question, I want to quote from A Storm of Swords, chapter 33. This is Gilly talking to Sam when they're at Craster's Keep. Says, basically saying, take the boy. Please, Sir Crow. He's a boy just like Nella said he'd be. If you don't take him, they will. They, said Sam, and the raven cocked its black head and echoed, they. The boy's brothers, said the old woman to the left. Craster's sons. The white cold's rising out there, Crow. I can feel it in my bones. These poor old bones don't lie. They will be here soon. The sons. So it is implied in the books that the children that Craster leaves out become White Walkers. It's not stated outright, but this is not an enormous departure from the text. It's just explicitly stating what was previously implied.
Yeah, and the other thing is that it also strongly suggests that they're alive, not, you know.
Well, I mean, the White Walkers themselves have never been zombies. There's a clear distinction between the zombies and the
and the White Walkers, but I mean, it's sort of like the going back to like Santeria and the man who controls the zombie himself being being a part, but bringing them into the fold. All this has not sort of been clear, and now it sort of is. The White Walkers
Right.
are really okay. This sounds terrible in that 19th century way, but they're touched. And because it's Michelle MacLaren, who was a producer on Breaking Bad, when they're touched, their eyes turn that nice crystal meth blue of Walter White's. She was using. I promise you, she was using the same filters. And if she wasn't, and she sees this, please feel free to tell me I'm wrong on Twitter. But I thought it was a breathtakingly beautiful addition to the canon to do this, even if the horns were a little bit much. Would you know? Or are you frozen? Right, Stephen appears to be frozen. So, not sure what to do about that. Well, I'll just pretend this is what Stephen's saying. Scott, I'm agreeing with everything you just said. I could probably hear you, but I can't say anything because I'm not part of the podcast anymore. But you are so right about everything, and this was great talking to you. So we should have some final thoughts on the episode now that Stephen's back and is not being ventriloquized by me.
Okay. Yeah, I was momentarily possessed by a White Walker. So, the mistake made in last week's episode has created this disjuncture around Jaime and Cersei. Other than that, I mostly enjoyed the episode, and I'm really excited to sort of see where they're going with this stuff that's not in the books. I'm like, some people's reaction was kind of angry. They didn't like that they've gotten spoiled by the show. I honestly think that to an extent that's karmic justice for spoiling so many show watchers about Ned and the Red Wedding.
Ooh, yeah.
So, I liked it. I'm looking forward to seeing what they're going to do next.
I'm absolutely in agreement with you. In fact, this is probably the episode so far this season, believe it or not, that I've enjoyed the most from a narrative perspective. And I think it is in large part because I'm being surprised again by this series based on a novel I'm so familiar with that I appreciate the novelty, and I'm not, because I honestly think a lot of people who are very upset at deviations from the book remind me of the Baptist Bible thumpers I grew up with, who, at least from what I could tell on Facebook, went and saw the Noah movie,
right,
and were very upset about the deviations from the 5 chapters in Genesis that story actually takes up. And like, yeah, we could make a movie out of that. I'm fine with going off canon. I'm probably in the minority on that, but I like that I was surprised.
All right, cool.
Okay, well,
see you next week.
Yes, this has been another Lawyers, Guns, Money podcast. I'm Scott R. Kaufman.
I'm Steve Atwell.
And we'll see you next week.
Bye.